This was a cynical thing to say. So just that's the Human Rights Council for you, where they have one agenda item on the world and one agenda item on Israel at every single meeting. And just a few days ago, their UN Human Rights Office, the Office of the High Commissioner, posted a tweet saying that we are alarmed that Israel is planning to flood the tunnels in Gaza with seawater. The first comment they've ever made on tunnels. They're alarmed that Israel wants to flood the tunnels. This could cause, they said, severe adverse human rights impacts and widespread environmental damage. That's the only comment they have to make on the tunnels. And it's hard to know where to begin. You couldn't even make this stuff up. They were silent, of course, when Egypt flooded tunnels in 2015 for smugglers, but when Israel tries to stop terrorists and flush them out, suddenly they get upset. And they speak about human rights impacts. They're not concerned that Hamas has pledged to again repeat their genocidal attempts of October 7th. Again and again they swear to do it. And Israel's trying to stop the terrorists. That is not a human rights issue for this UN Human Rights Office. And they have nothing to say about the fact that hundreds of millions of dollars of our aid money was used to build terror tunnels. Terror tunnels. And this brings me to another agency, UNRWA. UNRWA is, there's the UN Refugee Agency across the street from me in Geneva. That's for the whole world. And then UNRWA is just for the Palestinians. And we know, Einat Wilf, the expert on UNRWA, has commented, we're not surprised that when you give cement to Gaza to build homes, hospitals, and schools, they don't use it for that because they've been taught in UNRWA schools that they are refugees in Gaza, refugees from Israel. They have to go back. They're living in Palestinian areas, but they're told they have to go back to Israel, to Haifa, to Tel Aviv, to Lod, to undo 1948, to undo Israel. So we're not surprised that when they're given cement, they use it not to build homes, hospitals, and schools, but to build terror tunnels, as we saw, this massive 2-mile-long terror tunnel into Israel. That's when we exposed the fact that their school teachers, 153 of them, regularly incite to jihadi terrorism, glorify Hamas terrorist attacks, praise Adolf Hitler on their Facebook pages. This is systematic, we've exposed it, and UNRWA tries to downplay and ignore it, but the world is seeing the truth. I was in the Bundestag in Germany, and one of the members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Frank Müller-Rosenstedt, shared our report with 500 members of parliament, and he's called on Germany to defund UNRWA. I was in the Congress not so long ago, and Representative Chris Smith, chair of the subcommittee dealing with the UN, has also called for the same and is extremely alarmed about this incitement. And I want to report to you now that today in Switzerland, we never would have imagined, but in Switzerland, the lower house of the Swiss parliament voted for the third time today in a week, to defund UNRWA. It's not final yet, but according to what we know, this decision should have the leverage and it should prevail, and if it does, it'll be a huge blow to UNRWA. A huge blow to UNRWA. Finally, I want to mention I mentioned about UN Women. We know for 2 months the Agency for Women was silent about Hamas sexual violence against Israeli women. And a few days ago, I wrote about one of their top officials, Deputy Chief Sarah Douglas of Peace and Security at UN Women. She spoke a week ago at the UN by Zoom. She spoke to the UN, and in the background in her house was a giant poster of Palestine. So we were a bit curious on who she is. I went on her Twitter account, and when you click like on Twitter, you may not know it, but people see what you like. And I saw that in the past 2 months, she liked no less than 153 anti-Israel and anti-American tweets that accuse Israel of genocide, by Ilhan Omar, by radical groups like If Not Now that are shutting down highways and bridges. She endorsed 153 of these tweets. She's supposed to be neutral by UN rules, impartial by UN rules, but she's embracing the most radical anti-Israel stuff. We exposed it. The next morning, she deleted her entire Twitter account. She deleted her LinkedIn account. It's being picked up by newspapers. Today, Senator Rick Scott called for this woman, top official, to be fired. Finally, it's not just the UN. Sadly, it has broken into the human rights movement. We just celebrated 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The founders of human rights at the United Nations were some of the most Zionist Jews of the 20th century. Hirsch Lauterpacht, a Zionist. René Cassin, who architected the Universal Declaration, a Zionist. Raphael Lemkin wrote the Genocide Convention, a Zionist. And we could go on. Eleanor Roosevelt, also a Zionist. And today, sadly, the human rights movement, if you dare to support Israel, you are a pariah in the human rights movement. And one of the groups that is the perpetrator of this betrayal of the founding principles is Human Rights Watch. I'm UN Watch, but we're talking about Human Rights Watch. Ken Roth, who just stepped down after 30 years, a Jew, but someone who hates Israel. And you know, just a few days ago, last week, 2 weeks ago, one of the senior editors of Human Rights Watch, we talked about October 8th, she couldn't take it anymore. A Jewish person, Danielle Haas, a Jewish person at Human Rights Watch, was there 12 years. She wrote a letter of resignation, and she said the response of Human Rights Watch to what happened on October 7th made her sick. And she said, over 12 years, I've witnessed bias, discrimination, anti-Israel, even anti-Semitism. And she kept quiet, but on October 8th, afterwards, she came out, and in a long letter, she exposed the bias of Human Rights Watch, which is enormously influential in the world. I shared it on Twitter. It got millions of views. Bill Ackman, the famous investor, shared it, and he said, I used to give to Human Rights Watch. I'm embarrassed. They have no credibility. They've become politicized. And this shows that some people, Jewish people, Danielle Haas, Bill Ackman, are seeing the light and are speaking out. All of us need to do what we can. Those of you who want information, we're going to start a petition to get this Sarah Douglas fired. Sign up on our website, unwatch.org. You can learn about it. Follow us on social media. You know, when the Israeli Prime Minister was ambassador to the UN, he went to see the Rebbe, who told him, you're entering an assembly of darkness. Your job is to light the candle of truth. All of us have an obligation, as the soldiers are fighting in Gaza, to do our bit to fight the darkness and to light the candle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hillel. Okay, to our main event. Our next guest needs no introduction. The only thing that I'll say is a quote from Quora, where one writer called him the conservative Jewish Batman. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ben Shapiro.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here among so many strangers. Well, October 7th was an extraordinarily clarifying moment. Above everything else, it was absolutely clarifying. My father, who was here, he likes to say there are certain moments where the veil is stripped away. And never in, certainly my lifetime, his father's lifetime, has there been a moment that stripped away all the veils quite like October 7th. Tonight, I want to talk about a bunch of truths that we have learned, many of them extremely hard truths. In particular, I want to talk about 3 truths that the state of Israel has learned, and 5 truths that the West has learned. And these are very important truths because, as we'll discuss, if we refuse to acknowledge these truths, then it means both the end of Israel and the end of the West. These truths are not deniable any longer. So I'm going to start with the state of Israel. So just to go right into it, the 3 truths that the state of Israel learned on October 7th is that, number 1, Oslo was a complete lie. It was a fraud. It was a lie. For those who have not been following subsequent Jewish history, the Oslo Accords were predicated on a baseline falsity. That baseline falsity is that could magically diplomacy your way to peace. That is not the way diplomacy works. Diplomacy is not an end in and of itself. Diplomacy is a means toward an end. You cannot simply take a non-corporeal being like a Palestinian peace partner and magic it out of thin air by signing an agreement with an ultra-terrorist like Yasser Arafat. And unfortunately, that mentality has permeated Israeli society for the subsequent 30 years. It is the reason why Israel somehow convinced itself that Hamas, too, could be substantiated into something that was not a genocidal terror group, that it could be contained, that they could turn into a normal governing body. There's this very prevalent idea in the West, and specifically in Israel, certainly rising with the post-Zionist movements in the late 80s and early 90s, that Israel, there are questions about its own morality, about the existence of the state. It could only be answered by pretending that on the other side were a bunch of legitimate claims that could be answered by a series of concessions. And it turns out that all of that was false. And the problem is that when you try to pretend that a non-peace partner is in fact a peace partner, you now make yourself the press agency for the other side of the aisle. And one of the things that you saw over the 30 years after Oslo is the state of Israel refusing publicly to look evil in its face, even as evil was making itself clear day in and day out, with thousands of Jews murdered from Oslo on, including the Second Intifada, including the rocket attacks, all the way up to October 7th. October 7th opened all eyes on this war, which is why right now, if you look at the Israeli public, there is zero support for any concessions, not only to Hamas, but also to the Palestinian Authority, which is still and always was a terror group. Anyone who's attempting to tell you that the Palestinian Authority is a legitimate governmental body that seeks a two-state solution is lying to you, just as Mahmoud Abbas is lying to you. Leave aside the part, Mahmoud Abbas does not even control the West Bank and has zero support inside the West Bank, which is why he's currently in, by my calculation, the 16th year of a 4-year elected term. They haven't had an election in the West Bank for nearly 2 decades because they know that were there to be an election, Hamas would win. By every available polling statistic in the West Bank, Hamas is by far the most popular body. Upwards of 80% of people living in the West Bank, according to 2 separate polls, are supportive of Hamas. This notion that you can make peace with a group of people who want your destruction is a lie, and pretending that away does not solve the problems. That is truth number 1. Pretending doesn't work, and that is connected to truth number 2, which is that there is no substitute for eternal vigilance. And it's very easy for me living in the United States to say that it's unconscionable to get tired. And I'm not serving in the IDF. My family isn't serving in the IDF. Obviously, we have members of our extended family. My wife is Israeli. We have members of our extended family who are serving in the IDF. Actually, a member of our extended family who was recently killed in Gaza. So there are people who are serving in the IDF in our extended family, but none of us have. So it's easy for me to say something like, you can't go to sleep. You can't simply believe that because something is hard, it therefore becomes unnecessary. And the reality is, the minute that Israel forgot about eternal vigilance, the minute that they went to sleep, October 7th happened. There was a belief, a foolish belief, that technology could solve for the baseline problem of, again, a genocidal terror group on your border living every day trying to figure out how to break through that technology. There was so much reliance on technology that this belief set in that the simple sophistication was going to prevent barbarians from overrunning your borders. And if the latter half of the 20th century has shown anything, it has shown that technological sophistication is not a substitute for willpower. Whether you're talking about Iraq, whether you're talking about Afghanistan, or whether you're talking about the Gaza Strip, technological sophistication does not solve for an intransigent enemy that wishes to destroy you and wishes to put in your place a Sharia law state. That's the lesson that Israel learned. That vigilance is not going to go away anytime soon. And then there's one very important and I think will be highly beneficial lesson that the state of Israel learned. So we came back from the state of Israel, we spent the Chagim over there, we have a place in Yerushalayim, and we came back from the state of Israel on October 6th. We got back on the Friday morning. My in-laws were still in our apartment when October 7th happened. And the day before, there was so much talk, I mean, we all know this, there's so much talk about the divisions inside Israeli society. Judicial reform, the state's tearing itself apart, will there be civil war? And I was going around saying to all the politicians, and I talked to virtually all the politicians over there, on both sides of the aisle actually, I was saying to them, you need to stop, because this isn't true. Jews are not going to shoot other Jews. Every Chiloni person has a Haredi cousin. Every Haredi person has a Dasi Leumi cousin. The belief system that Israel was so divided that it could not come together again because of something like judicial reform and a reasonableness clause. I was saying at the time, this is idiotic. In retrospect, you can all see how perfectly idiotic it was. Because the minute the real threat emerged, and it turns out that the real threat to Israel was not fellow Jews. The real threat was, again, genocidal terrorists living on Israel's border which would slaughter all the Jews, no matter how Chiloni. The places that got hit the hardest on October 7th were some of the most left-wing areas of Israel. The Gaza envelope, those kibbutzim, they voted like 80% for not only labor, but groups left of labor. These are not right-wing settlers. These were peaceniks. Many of the people who were killed spent their lives attempting to foment peace with the people literally in Gaza. I mean, there were peace activists who were kidnapped. And yet those were exactly the people who were also killed. And when that happened, the right-wing Jews in Israel didn't say, well, we have nothing in common with them. They said, those are our brothers. They were charging into the line of fire. And the same thing was true for left-wing Jews who put down all of their placards and took off their T-shirts protesting the government and immediately went and served. Reservists who were saying they wouldn't serve if judicial reform passed were the first people who started raising money and started raising resources, started getting ready for deployment. So all of the supposed barriers that exist inside the state of Israel disappear when the real rationale for the state of Israel emerges. And it turns out that the real rationale for the state of Israel is the same as it has always been, and it is twofold. One, Judaism and the Jewish people must be preserved. And two, there's an ever-present threat to both of those things. And because of that, the state of Israel will continue to preserve itself, and by the way, will be much, much stronger after this. The face of politics radically changed. I'll be honest with you, I'm actually not particularly worried about the internal cohesion of Israel. I'm not worried about the future of the state of Israel, other than in a very material military sense. I'm not worried about the state of Israel because they finally realized, for the first time in a very long time, why they are there. And they are starting to see each other the way that they once did, which is brothers in arms, despite all of the divisions. They're seeing each other as Am Yisrael, as opposed to seeing each other as members of different parties. And the next generation of leadership that arises in Israel, there will be a new generation of leadership because with a catastrophe of this size and scale, everyone at the top layer in Israeli politics is gone. Okay, right now it's a holding pattern. That is not going to be true for very long. Everyone at the top level is going to be gone. I'm talking left, I'm talking right, I'm talking center, I'm talking the IDF. There's going to be an entirely new generation of people who are intransigent about the necessity of Israeli survival and Israeli strength. And that is a very, very good thing. So those are the three lessons from Israel. One, Oslo was a lie, and diplomacy can't simply magic itself into being. Two, there's no substitute for eternal vigilance. And three, the divisions inside Israel are no match for the hatred outside of Israel that forces everyone back into cohesion. The place that I'm worried about a lot more, because I live here and I'm a citizen here, is America and the West. I am deeply concerned about America and the West because the truths that have to be learned in America and the West are not only larger, they are harder to reteach. There have been generations of failure not only to teach these truths, but generations of an unwilling attempt to undermine these basic truths. And there are 5 of them. The first one is that there are people who do not think like you. So the West has predicated itself on this Enlightenment theory that all human beings are the same. And this is spanned political parties. You saw this in sort of Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy. You saw it in Barack Obama suggesting that when it came to terrorism, all people really needed was jobs. Anything he actually said while he was president of the United States. But you also saw this in George W. Bush when he made a speech during his presidency where he said, every human heart yearns to be free. That is a lie. It is not true. Every human heart absolutely does not yearn to be free. At least not in the way that George W. Bush meant be free. That is certainly not the case. There are billions of people the world over who do not think like members of Western civilization. They do not think about individual rights. They do not think about things like property rights and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. They do not care about any of those things. They believe that they have a higher purpose, and that higher purpose trumps all of those things, and they are willing to commit any atrocity, literally any atrocity, in order to pursue that end. That's what October 7th was about. That's why I did something that no one in media does on October 9th, right? It was October 7th was Chabad, and then the next day was Yom Tov also. And my first show was October 9th on Monday. And that entire show, I just showed the atrocities, which is something that historically had not been done in media. And the reason I did this, and I did a whole thing about it the next day, why I'm doing this, the reason I was doing this is because these people do not think like you. There's literally nothing that anyone could do to anyone in this room that would make them burn a baby alive in this grid. Nothing. That's because you're a Westerner. That's because you don't think like members of Hamas. And pretending that members of Hamas are just secretly moderates, waiting to burst free, is not only stupid, it's unbelievably dangerous. It's why when you see members of the West and Western governments right now talking about, well, Hamas is totally separate from the civilian population. Listen, Israel right now is targeting Hamas terrorists. It should target Hamas terrorists to try to preserve as many civilian lives as humanly possible while preserving the lives of its own soldiers, which is top priority for them and should be. With that said, to pretend that the civilians in the Gaza Strip do not support Hamas is a lie. There is zero evidence to this effect. They do, in fact, support Hamas. In the West Bank, by the way, the rates of support are even higher. The reason the rates of support have dropped for people in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip for Hamas, is because it turns out that when Israel completely wrecks your entire life, then you maybe a little bit take the Hamas. But up until October 7th, they were perfectly happy with it, and October 8th, they were perfectly happy with it, and for a couple of weeks there, they were perfectly happy with it, and now it turns around to FAFO, right? Fuck around and find out. But that particular viewpoint does not change the underlying issue, which of course is support for genocidal, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic terrorism. There are people who don't think like us in the West, and we need to get used to that, or we're not going to perform anything remotely resembling a decent foreign policy or a decent moral way of life. So that's truth number one. Truth number two, multiculturalism is a giant sham and a huge failure. Multiculturalism is responsible for the importation of millions of people into the West who do not think like us. You can see this when you were watching the protests from London, with 300,000 people marching in solidarity with Hamas. And make no mistake, these are not quote-unquote pro-Palestine protests. Anybody who says that is lying to you. You can tell from the things that they're chanting, whether it's from the river to the sea, to there is no solution but intifada. All of these sorts of chants are not only prevalent, they are the only chants. There's never been a protest. A remote protest, I'm not there's been a protest at all, like a single protest, anywhere along the line, in favor of, for example, freeing the supposedly moderate Palestinian people of Hamas. And it's never happened, not once. There's not been a single protest anywhere on earth by Palestinian supporters claiming that Hamas needs to be done away with so there can be human rights and development in Gaza. Never has happened. And Hamas has been in charge there since 2006. So the importation of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, it really is millions of people, to support Hamas into the West has been a giant fail. And it's going to shape the West for decades to come. Not only demographically, but because there will be a reaction. That reaction is starting to take place. I think it's very good, by the way. There's a reaction taking place in the West. Governments are now being elected that do not want this anymore. It's why you have Bert Wilders, who's just elected to the leadership of the Netherlands. It's why you are seeing Giorgia Meloni in victory in Italy. It's why you're seeing the rise of right-wing parties in France. And by the way, it's kind of amazing, but Marine Le Pen's party, which is very much shunned because her father was openly an anti-Semite, Marine Le Pen is very, very pro-Israel. Why? Because she looks at the state of the world and she realizes the threat to France is not the Jews. The threat to France is radical Muslims who have been imported to France. This is going to shape Europe for decades to come. And it should. Because the Europeans have made a huge mess for themselves. They've now reproduced, they've had no babies, they've imported entire labor populations that really hate the values of the West and created enclaves of terror support in Western capitals. This stuff is really scary, and you're starting to see the effect of that in Europe. That's truth number two. Truth number three is that the West has tended to believe, at least members of it's not some isolationists on the right and a lot of the left, have tended to believe that hatred for the West is because the West supports Israel. And what this October 7th war has shown is precisely the opposite. The hard left in Europe and in the United States hates Israel because they hate the West. They don't hate the West because they hate Israel. It's the opposite. Israel is a colonial outpost of the West, according to these people. They say it clearly and openly. It's why they suggest that what Hamas is doing is decolonization, which is the same exact phraseology that they use with regard to, for example, the United States government. In fact, there was a poll that came out over the weekend. I'm sure many of you saw it. This Harbour Harris poll. It was shocking, astonishing poll. It said 60% of people were aged 18 to 24. This is particularly prominent, this viewpoint, among young people, who are, in fact, morons. But it's not just that they're morons, it's that they have terrible parents. Let me be frank with you. If you raised a kid who is in this category, you really need to look at your parenting style. Dead serious about this. There's an entire article in the Wall Street Journal about a 3-generation family where grandma was supposedly a Zionist. I happen to know the family, so I have some inside information on this. But grandma was supposedly a Zionist. Actually, she's actually a far leftist. It was more in the communist camp. But according to the Wall Street Journal, she was a Zionist. And then her kid was a progressive rabbi. And then their kids, turns out, are all wild leftists who hate the state of Israel. Why? Because what they were trying to foster among their children was openness to all ideas and critical thinking. And the only thing that's important is that they truly fight for what they believe. If you tell that crap to your kids, you did a bad job. Your job as a parent is to instill eternal truth in your child as their child grows. As your child grows, as your child's brain develops, that child will inevitably become a more critical thinker because when you're 3, you're not a critical thinker, and when you're 20, you're slightly more critical of everything, including your parents. But that is not your job as a parent. Sure, you want your kids to ask questions, and then you want to have answers to those questions, because if you don't, you have not provided them any guiding influences in their life, and they are likely to be guided by some of the worst influences. Anyway, that's my little riff about moronic 18 to 24-year-olds. So, 60% of people who are aged 18 to 24 said that the genocidal October 7th terror attack, quote, can be justified by the grievances of Palestinians. That is the essence of immorality. 6 in 10 say that the mass rape of women, the burning of children alive, the slaughter of men, women, and children, the dragging of men, women, and children back into the hellhole that is the Gaza Strip, quote, can be justified by the grievances of Palestinians. 51%, according to this poll, of 18 to 24-year-olds think, quote, the long-term answer to the Israel-Palestinian dispute is for Israel to be ended and given to Hamas and the Palestinians. That is a majority of 18 to 24-year-olds. So where does that come from, right? My contention in this section here is that the people who hate Israel don't actually hate Israel. They hate the West, and they hate Israel's an outpost in the West. Why am I saying that? Because the most important question in this poll had nothing to do with Israel. Here was the question, quote, there's an ideology that white people are oppressors, and non-white people and people of certain groups have been oppressed, and as a result should be favored today at universities and for employment. Do you support or oppose this ideology? Now, this ideology is known as intersectionality, the basic idea of which is that every system in America is a guise for some sort of hierarchy of power. It's all artificial. Meritocracy is fake. The people who succeed in America succeed because there is a system that is rigged on their behalf, rigged by white people for white people. Now, on the data, this is absolutely idiotic. Absolutely idiotic. The highest earning subgroups in the United States, by a long margin, are Asian American. By a large margin. Sri Lankan Americans out-earn Americans. Pakistani Americans out-earn, when I say Americans, white Americans, that is what I mean there, to correct. Pakistani Americans out-earn white Americans. Japanese Americans, Thai Americans, like a huge number of minority groups out-earn white Americans. Does that mean the system was designed by Asian Americans for the benefit of Asian Americans? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Right? This is empirically provably false. This ideology that all of American society is structured, and Western society is structured by white oppressors in order to keep down people of color, that ideology is approved by 18 to 24-year-olds. Here's the margin. 79 to 21. 8 to 2. They believe that there are white oppressors who oppress everybody else. What do you think the corollary of that is? Okay, so there are a lot of Jews who heretofore have believed that if they call themselves a minority group and they hang out with Black Lives Matter and they hang out with all the right progressive groups, that magically they will be allowed to be part of this intersectional coalition. Breaking news, you're stupid. It wasn't true. If you believe that because you managed to get Black Lives Matter to a part of the cool kids group, wrong you are. Because it turns out that the entire basis for this philosophy is that unsuccessful groups are unsuccessful because they're exploited. And successful groups are successful because they are exploiters. Now, do Jews, generally speaking, in the United States fall into the category of successful or unsuccessful? By every available metric, Jews are one of the most successful minorities in world history, particularly in the United States. So they don't fit into that matrix, because Jews are both oppressed in the sense that they are victimized by hate crimes, and in the sense that they have states that are a constant threat in the state of Israel, and also extremely successful. So they break the matrix, which means they can't be part of the minority group. They are part of the whites. They are the white oppressors. And guess what? That's exactly what the poll says. 67%, two-thirds of people aged 18 to 24 agree, quote, Jews as a class are oppressors and should be treated as oppressors. Okay, that's where that ideology is coming from. So when people say that they're angry at Israel because of the occupation, or because of the history of 1948, or the Nakba, or the long history of a Palestinian state which has never existed, and given current situation is likely never to exist, because there will be not a peace partner on the other side. In the long history of that has nothing to do with it. It doesn't happen. One of the things you'll notice whenever you argue these particular issues, no one ever makes an affirmative case for why a Palestinian state would be good for the world. It's not necessary to make that case. The only case you have to make is that the Jews are bad. And that's the case that is constantly being made. Because why? Because the Jews are an oppressor class. Anti-Semitism and the theory of white supremacy controlling everything, those are two theories, left-wing theories, that absolutely cross streams. In fact, they form a Venn diagram. This Venn diagram is a circle. It's just a circle. Okay, fourth truth. There is no retreat from foreign policy realism. Okay, so there's a group on the right who tend to believe that all of American foreign policy, everything that's happening to America right now, it's happening to Israel, it's all blowback. It's blowback. No one has agency except for the West. If the West would just mind its own business and get out of the Middle East, if the West would just ignore Israel and let Israel fall to the wolves, if the West would just do all of this stuff, the world would be a better place. This is a lie. The War of October 7th shows that. I'll give you a very clear example. Right now, you have a bunch of ragtag, illiterate pirates who are holding up shipping in the Red Sea. They're shutting down the 10% of global shipping in the Red Sea. All you have to do to see from backwards is look at a map. It's the shortest route from Southeast Asia up into Europe, right? You have to go through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean, and up the coast. Otherwise, you have to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which is significantly longer and significantly more expensive. Okay, so a lot of shipping goes through there. Houthi pirates, who are operating like handheld drones and inflatables, are holding up the shipping. And meanwhile, West's like, I don't know, what should we do? This is so difficult. What if we're too mean to the Houthis? What happens if we hit them? Could this bring Iran into the war? I mean, first of all, the answer is no. There's one thing that the mullahs are doing right now, which is smart, which is they're using proxy wars. Because if the mullahs ever went directly to war with the United States, they would all be dead. And they know it, and we know it, and everyone knows it. The United States is the most powerful military force on the face of the earth in human history. That war would be over extremely quickly. The occupation would take longer, but the war itself would be over very quickly. So, the West has been taking this bizarrely kind of pussy-footed approach to all of this, when the reality is that if you take that approach, if you take the isolationist approach, whereby everybody will just leave everybody alone if we get out of the Middle East, it's the United States, and what? It's just a lie. And it's likely to lead to, by the way, serious economic problems. If you think things are bad right now, in terms of oil prices spiking in the last couple of days, because again, with more on Houthis are blowing up ships in the Red Sea, wait until China gets a load of that and realizes that they can shut off the Taiwan Straits. They can threaten the Straits of Malacca if the West doesn't do anything, which is where literally all the shipping goes. Realist foreign policy is a necessity. It is not some sort of highfalutin Wilsonian, we'll fix the world, neocon, every place has to become a democracy thing. It's a protect your interests because those interests are vital thing. Okay, finally, fifth lesson that the West is having to relearn. And this one is the hardest of all for the West to relearn because we've all lied to ourselves for legitimately all the time since about the end of the Vietnam War. And that is, war is super, duper ugly. And it is super, duper ugly, particularly if you hope to win that war. This is something that the media lies to everyone about. It's something the government lies to everybody about. They pretend that war is somehow, I don't know, impeccable. That you can be amazing in a highly urbanized area, one of the most crowded places in the world, at separating off a terrorist who's carrying a gun from a 15-year-old who may be supporting that terrorist but is not carrying a gun and is standing right next to the terrorist. And there's this bizarre idea, and it's being passed around the halls of Congress by, unfortunately, some Democrats today, this idea that Israel has to stop with the civilian casualties right now. They need a better way. And as I said on my show, Israel's all ears. Supposedly they have the space laser. They don't. So if you have the space laser, then perhaps you could give it to them so that they can only hit the terrorists and not hit the civilians. Israel doesn't want to kill the civilians. Hamas wants to kill the civilians. That's their entire war strategy. Literally their entire strategy is to get their own civilians killed so they can blame Israel for all of their problems. Why? Because the West is idiotic. The West believes that war can be fought without any of these sorts of uglinesses. And the reality is, because of that, evil people use that against the West. Evil people shield their guns with children. This is true in Afghanistan and Iraq, just as it's true in the Gaza Strip. I was speaking last week with a former Green Beret sniper named Tim Kennedy. Many of you, I'm sure, may have heard of him, MMA fighter. And he said to me on the air, there's nothing more dangerous than an 11-year-old with an AK. Now, we all sit here like, what in the world? Like, what is it? An 11-year-old with an AK? Like, even in Florida, that's not like a thing. Okay, but like an 11-year-old in a war-fighting scenario with an AK. But, let's be real. That is what is happening in the Gaza Strip. This pretend world where everyone under the age of 18 is a minor, in the same way that you're a 17-year-old minor who plays video games and smokes dope in your parents' basement in the United States, as opposed to if you're 17 in the Gaza Strip, there is a very significant shot that you are working directly for or with Hamas. And then you're counted as a minor civilian casualty in all the casualty numbers. War is brutal. War is hellish. War is terrible. And if you're unwilling to recognize that truth, you are going to lose. It's something, by the way, that Israel is recognizing. You know, today, it's one of the most astonishing things, actually, I may have ever seen. Today, there was a letter that was put out by a woman. Some of you, I'm sure, may have seen it. Her name is Iris Haim. She's the mother of one of the hostages who was accidentally killed in the Gaza Strip, Yoram Haim. It's a horrible, horrible story. There are 3 hostages who apparently escaped Hamas Gentle Mercy, and they're hiding for days, and they put up a sign in food, but understandably, the IDF has no idea whether this is a booby trap or not, because they literally have been booby trapping baby dolls in the Gaza Strip. They're booby trapping dead bodies in the Gaza Strip. They'll strip down bodies, and then in the pants they'll put booby traps to kill people. So they see these 3 people running around without shirts with white flags, and they see a sign that's in Hebrew, and they're thinking to themselves, this is crazy. How could there be a sign like that? And so they accidentally killed these 3 hostages. Worst story of the war from Israel's perspective so far. And here's what the mother of one of the dead hostages wrote. This is just an astonishing thing. You want to talk about Sadat? This is true Sadat kind of stuff. She wrote, quote, and she wrote a letter to the soldiers who accidentally killed her son. Quote, I want to tell you that I love you very much. I know that what happened was not your fault. There is no one to blame but Hamas. Israel needs you to stay alive, to stay healthy. Don't hesitate for one moment. If you think you see a terrorist, don't think twice. You need to protect yourselves, because that's the only way you can protect us.
Come visit us. We want to embrace you. We want to tell you, as hard as this is to say, that you did the right thing. Not one of us judges you. None of us are angry at you. That is unthinkable moral heroism. But that is what it takes to win a war. That is what it takes to win a war. And the West better get used to that, or the West is going to keep on losing wars to barbarians like the Taliban, who are in no ways comparable militarily to the United States. But the West is going to keep losing to these people until it realizes that war is ugly, and war is interminable, and war is long, and occupations are long. And this is why we see the United States pushing Israel for what's going to happen the day after. Can you just hand it over to the PA? No. You know what's actually going to happen the day after, realistically speaking? Israel is going to have to settle on what will be a military occupation of the Gaza Strip from now until probably the end of time. At least until there is some sort of actual government to substitute for Israel in the pacification of the Gaza Strip. That is a reality. It's an ugly reality. It is also a reality. And if people don't get on board with that reality right now, they're going to be very surprised when it materializes anyway. Because guess what? The Israelis don't know it. The Israelis are not willing to hand over the Gaza Strip to the VA. There's no support inside Israel for any of that right now. The West better get used to all 5 of these lessons, or the West is going to lose a lot of wars. If they ignore these lessons, the West will fall. If the West ignores the lesson, there are people out there who do not think like they do, then we will continue to import people who do not think like we do. And they will continue to undermine the Republic and undermine the values we care about. If we refuse to acknowledge that there's a lot of hatred for the West bred in our own younger generation, we're not going to know how to counter that, which means that we actually have to inculcate better values among our kids and stop pretending that they're just wayward youths who are experimenting at this point. They are not. They've been indoctrinated throughout the education system with this garbage, and that needs to stop. That means building. It means divesting from universities, the way Bill Ackman was mentioned earlier, the way Bill Ackman is doing. If you are donating to a major university, you should seriously consider withdrawing your money today. Today. It means that if we retreat from foreign policy realism into a stupid isolationism, the nefarious powers around the world will grow. Again, we're the beneficiaries of 2 full centuries of Western hegemony. Right? The British guaranteed the safety of the seas for fully a century and a half, and then you had America guaranteeing the safety of the seas from 1945 on. If that goes away, things are going to get extremely rough. If you really liked the pricing over the last couple of years, get ready for something significantly worse when the freedom of the seas goes away because the isolationists take over. And finally, if we don't realize that war is really, really, really ugly, we're just going to get into wars over and over and over thinking that they're easy and clean, and then we're going to lose those wars because it turns out war is never easy and war is never clean. So, those are the 3 lessons from Israel, and the 3 lessons for the and the 5 lessons for the United States and the West. And as far as what all of us can do, the thing that I've been saying is that we all have a different skill set. Right? So let's not all pretend that we have the same skill set. Some of our skill set is in business. Use your business to promote good ideas, to back the state of Israel, to back political candidates who you like and agree with your values. If you are a person who is good at speaking, go and speak. If you're a person who is just good at teaching, go and teach. I think everybody right now is kind of rushing to do the thing that's right at hand. And that's nice, and it makes us feel good. But the thing that's actually going to make the world a better place is you using the particular skill set that you cultivated over the course of your life to do the right thing with. If you can do that, then you'll make the world a much better place, exponentially speaking. Happy to take your questions.
We have some time for Q&A, so we're going to set up. Is this
Hello? Here. Is one working? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have some time for Q&A, and we thank Ben for his time. If anybody has any specific questions, we're going to ask you to please line up behind the microphone and leave it to less than 30 seconds. I'm going to start off with a follow-up question for Ben, because specifically, we have in the audience tonight, obviously, a lot of parents. We also have students. We have high school students here. We have some college students. You cited the Harvard-Harris poll. And we have parents that are making decisions today with their children whether or not to send them off to elite universities, other universities in the U.S., or to choose, quote-unquote, a safe university like Yeshiva University or Torah College. So first off, do you have an opinion as to whether parents should consider removing their children's applications from elite universities and send them to a safe university?
So if you have the wherewithal to do it, you certainly should. And I speak as a graduate of UCLA and Harvard Law School, so I went to one of the elite universities and one that's semi-elite. I think that there's two questions there. One is what's good for your kid, and one is what's good for the world. What's good for your kid is going to depend on the kid. If you send your kid and your kid does not know enough about the world, doesn't know how to answer questions, doesn't have strong ideology, doesn't really know enough, putting them in harm's way ideologically speaking is a fool's errand. You're going to lose both your money and the kid. And so that's a real mistake. But there are kids who are really prepared for that. Like for me, going to Harvard Law was wonderful because I went there, I learned the arguments of people I disagreed with, I got more informed, I was able to argue better, it was very helpful to me. And so I think there is a subgroup of students for whom that's a very good thing. But if you're not one of those students, then you should really think about doing something else. I also think that the value of a degree is going to drop rather radically in the quite near future. I think that already you're seeing among the elites that I talk to, who do a lot of hiring at major companies, they're starting to realize that a degree from Harvard now is not what a degree from Harvard was 40, 50 years ago. And that, in fact, a degree in DEI queer theory doesn't make you a good employee. In fact, it may make you a significantly worse employee. And so I think that that's starting to change around the country. Again, I don't like sort of broad answers because I think every situation is a little bit different. But broadly speaking, that's the answer. As far as the other side, which is should you be giving your money to these universities, I mean, tuition is money, and we should recognize that tuition is money. So if you have other avenues for your kids, I highly recommend you check out the other avenues for your kids before you check out sending your kids to a university where you're going to give them a couple $100,000 for their kid.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to that, before we get to the first question, so let's assume that you do not send your kid to an elite university, and the leadership of the United States, the strongest nation in the world, is coming out of these elite universities. And based on what you've said and based on what we understand from the media, the university students are quite liberal, and now we're not going to be feeding our conservative Jewish value students into these schools. What does the future of America look like if we don't put our own children and our students into these schools to fight the battle, rise to the top, and get into political positions and other leadership positions in the United States?
So again, I think there's certain kids you can tell are sort of qualified for that from a very early age. And my parents didn't have any problem with sending me. I'm very combative, obviously. Was sending me to a place where I was going to be the only Republican in a 30-mile radius. That was okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's true for everyone. I also think that, again, the days of these degrees carrying with them just magic, I think that that's starting to wither quite quickly. And I think that that goes along with a broader reinterpretation of American life in which the elite class is no longer going to be considered fit for leadership. I think that what's happening in a much softer way here than Israel is something similar. In Israel, there's a belief system that everybody who's been in charge for the last 30 years basically needs to go. And I think that in the aftermath of what we're seeing politically in the United States, there will be a backlash where there is a decision made that everybody who's in the elite class cannot be trusted with power at any serious level. And I hope that's what's coming for the United States. If not, then what's going to end up happening is real polarization. If you're here in Florida, a Harvard degree is going to go the same place that a Harvard degree is going to go in New York. And it's not going to be treated the same way. And frankly, it shouldn't be treated that way.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take our first question.
Great, thanks, Ben, for coming. First of all, most importantly, my two brothers already know are serving in the IDF in Gaza right now. They got off on the first time in 2 weeks, literally an hour ago, and they said, please tell Ben that we love everything that he's doing. They reached the Oxford Union speech as well as a couple other things, and it's giving them a lot of positive thoughts. So thank you.
Same thing, since they're on the front lines of fighting against evil. So I mean, they're doing a hell of a lot more than I would have done.
Thank you. So the next thing is, speaking of the Oxford Union, I just graduated from Oxford a year ago. I'm by no means elite. I'm an easily startup founder, unlike some other people from these elite institutions. What's amazing me is out of maybe 6 Jews out of 350 in my class. I was one of the only ones in our Telegram chats that's been constantly pushing out, you know, and saying things. And what I didn't realize growing up in the U.S. is how indoctrinated a lot of the people are in the Middle East and a whole revisionist history of the Middle East. So from your, you know, discussions with various people in politics and throughout your life, can you just sort of talk about the indoctrination of the 2 billion people, Muslims in the Middle East, about the history of Israel? And that was really sad that some of my best friends were saying things that I thought weren't true.
Oh yeah, I mean, the basic idea, it depends. I mean, there's more sophisticated versions that I'm sure you saw at Harbour, but the really unsophisticated version is that the Jews are a people that is fake, is disconnected, was never in state. The land of Israel never belonged to the Jews. The Jews are a completely foreign European body that has been imposed in the Middle East. It's all fake. It's not real at all. That all of the archaeology even is just Israeli lies. All of it's lies. And that it's basically just a bunch of white Europeans who were planted down there as the British Empire basically sticking something there to stop the Arabs from controlling their historic homeland of Palestine. And the Jews are worse than the Nazis. They're an offshoot of the Nazis. In fact, they're the ultimate human rights violators. I'm sure that this is the sort of stuff that you are hearing as well. And in doing so, by the way, they tend to rely very often on some of the useful idiots of the post-Zionist left in Israel. There's post-Zionist historians who write books that are specifically anti-historical and promote many of these same ideas. The Jews were not even a nation. The Jews are a fake nation that were concocted. Like that's an actual thing that they try to argue. And with no connection to the land whatsoever. That's the number one thing. And then, of course, the Jews are, you know, religiously trash and oppressors and murderers and all the rest of the stuff. And this is the way that it's taught for 2 billion people around the earth. I mean, when you talk to people who are former Muslims, like, say, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who grew up in a society like this in Somalia, I mean, she'll tell you straight up that this is exactly what she was taught when she was in madrasa, when she was in school. So that's true for a huge number, literally billions of people across the world.
Thank you. It's sad as a startup founder whose co-founder is Muslim, prays 5 times a day and is saying some of the things that you just said, as well as some other things. Anyway, I'll see you at the Unheard Club in Westminster next time you come with Fred Sayers.
That's good. Thank you.
Hey man, thanks for coming. I'll be quick. What are your thoughts on the peace deal with Egypt? I feel like there's this like national consensus that this was like a solid peace deal. But like in my mind, we gave like an enemy state a territory more than twice the size of Israel with oil and gas, and in exchange we received their word that they won't attack us. Yes, I mean it turned out that they didn't attack us, and on top of that, we took back the beauty of the Gaza Strait, which we know what the problems that come from there. So what are your thoughts on that? I think the Rebbe Lubavitch was opposed to the deal. So
yeah, I mean, obviously the accords between Sadat and Begin were highly controversial at the time. And to be fair, the Sinai Desert had never been considered an integral part of sort of the land of Israel. The only question was whether Israel required it militarily in order to defend itself. It gave up significant oil deposits in the Sinai Desert. It removed some Jews who were already living in the Sinai Desert after the peace deal went through in 78. I will say that is Israel's quietest border. And so, at least in that particular case, you can make the claim that there was some logic to it. It came very close to being very illogical. If Mohammed Morsi, for example, had remained the leader of Egypt rather than being immediately couped by El-Sisi, we'd be having a very different conversation about the necessity or utility of giving up land to a state that has historically wanted to destroy the state of Israel. Again, they came very close to basically having a Muslim Brotherhood state right on their southern border. And that would have been extraordinarily more dangerous. So you can only kind of look at peace deals in light of what they brought about further. On an ideological level, had I been born in 1978, I was born in 84, had I been until 78, I probably would have had very serious reservations about signing a peace deal like that. In light of subsequent history, you can at least make the argument in favor of that peace deal as opposed to any of the other deals that Israel was trying to cut in the region. They do have a cold peace deal with Jordan, which has been somewhat durable over the time period, which, again, you can make an argument for that as well, because it required very few concessions.
the fact that we received the Gaza Strip that has created all these problems, and just
yes, I mean, there was a serious question in '67 about whether to even take the Gaza Strip. The only reason that the Gaza Strip was taken was out of military necessity. And Israel's been trying to get back to Egypt ever since. It's like, no way, man. We want no part of the Gaza Strip. That's the part of the story that's always hilarious to me. And everybody in the middle is like, nope, not a single person. We're not sending money, nothing. Well, let the Jews handle it. And it was like, the Jews hate the people of the Gaza Strip. The Jews are the only people who've ever done anything for the people of the Gaza Strip. The Egyptians shut the border and are like, well, these things happen. That's rough. It's rough. Sorry. The entire Arab world's reaction to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip has basically been that meme. The meme of the guy who's drowning and his hand is just above the water, and then a hand comes in from the side and gives him 5 as he drowns. That's the entire Arab world in the Gaza Strip right now. It's like, go guys, you're doing a oh, no, that's sad. Oh no. And meanwhile, they're ripping on. It's absurd. But yes, of course, if Israel could have handed back the Gaza Strip as to Egypt as part of that deal, that'd be better. But yeah, again, hindsight is 20. That deal was not on the table. It wasn't on the table. Thank you.
So I want to follow up on that question because Sadat, I think, is a good example. His life ended in assassination, and obviously he reached out to Israel, and they made peace, Israel and Egypt. Do you think there's anybody within the West Bank or Gaza that can be a Sadat?
No. Literally no. I mean, because understand that Sadat came from the Egyptian military. There is no functional military body in the West Bank or Gaza that is not a terrorist organization. That happens to be very often the case with the Middle East. The people who you're making a deal with are the heads of military organizations that's actually not answerable to the population. And then you get left-wingers criticizing you for making some sort of deal with a military dictator as opposed to making a deal with people themselves, as though democracy is the highest value as opposed to, actual human rights and liberty. But I wish that there were. Israel, I'm sure, wishes that there were. And it's not like Israel's desperate to govern in Geneva. And this is the part that's so astonishing to me. So the entire world is acting as though Israel is desperate to be the presiding power over Geneva. Even if Israel were to annex the entirety of Judea and Samaria, there would still be local rule inside Geneva by Palestinians who are electing, presumably, their local mayor. And nobody wants their sons and daughters serving in Geneva. The problem is that if there's an alternative, there's no alternative. And nobody's offered an alternative. They're just going to shout at the wind and they wish there were one.
Thank you.
Ben, thank you so much for coming. I'm a rocket scientist, a brain surgeon, small business owner, and a parent of 3 really smart little girls who I'm pretty sure in the future are going to need a brick and mortar university. Daily Wire has provided alternatives. There are tweezers, 50. Would you consider actually a Jeremy's University to make something that my kids could actually do?
Does anyone have a few $1 billion of endowment money on hand? There are alternatives that are being built. So first of all, I will say that I love this state. This state is absolutely wonderful. Ben Sass at the University of Florida is doing an extraordinary job. It's terrific. The repurposing of the new college is excellent. The University of Austin, which is beginning in Texas, led by many people I'm friends with, is terrific. Hillsdale College is doing really well. The one thing that has not been built, obviously, is stuff that's in your arena, right? In the hard sciences, there are no real alternatives to top universities because these are largely research institutions. The dirty little secret of Harvard is that all of its prestige comes not from the liberal arts, but from all of the STEM programs. And that's true for virtually all of these major universities. The liberal arts are living off the fat of the land. It's going to take an awful lot of money to start something like that. I also think the university system is going to absolutely crater over the course of the next 20 years. I don't think that the model of put a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds in a college together and they're going to learn together, I can't see that lasting in a society as decentralized and internet-based as our own. I just don't think that's the way things are going to go over the course of the next couple of decades.
Thank you very much.
Ben, thanks for coming. You said in one of your recent videos you moved from California to Florida because of your review of the Department of Health laws and regulations in regards to Corona. You had found that they actually had a right to do it. They did restrictions, vaccinations, and the like. You came to Florida, it's much more free. I'm from New York. I know what you're talking about. My question is, do you believe that U.S. code from the federal and state side could restrict us as Orthodox Jews to come to the point where we're going to not be able to practice freely, where you'll have to come up and say, I think it's time for us to all move to Israel, and this is not the place for us, because there does come a time in history. Joe Bopker did a great article on the fear of the sect. He was born in Ulm, Germany, a displaced person camp, and his question to his parents were, why did you not see through the lines? Do you think we're not seeing through the lines of what's happening with the populace today?
So one of the reasons that I left the state of California was not just the COVID restrictions and the sillinesses of that. It was the fact that socially they were moving in a direction where I felt it was going to be very difficult to raise my kids Orthodox. And that was a high priority to me. I felt they were going to use anti-discrimination laws so we had to crack down on shuls and schools.
And they did.
And they have. And they will do significantly more of it in the future if allowed to by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is acting as a bit of a bulwark against that right now, thanks to President Trump's elections. But the question as to how close we are to that changing is an open one. There are a lot of old justices on the court that can shift, and you could see a reversion to anti-discrimination law, meaning really anti-religious law, winning the day in places like California. Now, again, Florida has been a state that's moved significantly to the right. I think one of the best things that's happening in the United States is the big story. There are a lot of people who are very angry that everybody who is right-wing is moving into Florida, and the country is becoming more polarized between red and blue. And I think to myself, that's great. That's wonderful. I came here because I want to live in a red state. I don't want to go in purple. I love the place. I don't want to go anywhere. So, I'm not nearly as fearful about the future in the state of Florida as I was in the state of California. But obviously, when core liberties are under threat anywhere you are, you have to be thinking about what comes next. So I think we're close to that point in Florida. I don't. So I think they're a lot closer to that point in California. I really, really do, which is why I got my family out of there.
So you do believe that there could come a point where you might have to come up and say, guys, I think that our life in the United States might have to be shifted.
I think that anyone who's a liberty-loving person, Jew or not Jew, has to look at their core liberties and figure out whether they believe those core liberties can be maintained where they live. And if they can't, they have to move. I mean, it's literally how the United States was started.
So Ben, you've spoken a little bit about gun ownership. And here in the state of Florida, obviously a lot of people carry weapons. Can you speak briefly about the difference between what was just mentioned, possibly moving to Israel, owning guns for the purpose of protecting yourself from government versus protecting yourself from private citizens?
Well, I mean, in Israel, obviously, the chief threat is coming from next door. And so the idiotic gun laws that were pervaded by the Israeli government for years and years and years among a population that is highly weapons literate. I mean, it's a population where a huge percentage of them serve in the military, especially what they're doing with guns. Significantly more than in the United States, by the way. The notion that people in the Gaza envelope didn't have guns when they were 5 feet. And people in the United States, I mean, I'm sure virtually everyone in this room has spent time in Israel, and not in the Gaza envelope, at least in Israel, and seen proximity. You know, until you visit Israel, you literally don't understand any of the conflict because the geography is insane. I mean, when you say that Kfar Aza is next to Gaza, I don't mean Kfar Aza is next to Gaza the way that Harbour is like somewhat close to Boca Raton or something. I mean, like, Kfar Aza is here, and Gaza is that wall. That's what I mean. I mean, like, that's what the citizens are talking about. The idea the state of Israel said to people living here, okay, how much terrorists? And they're living, like, on the other side of that wall, no guns for you. It's so unbelievably insane. That's going to change. That's one of the things in Israel that's going to change really radically. A lot of people are going to own guns. A lot of people should own guns. And I'm very hopeful that that will continue to be loosened in the very near future. In fact, if the Interior Minister, Mike Beer, doesn't do it, then I think that he's going to be in a lot of hot water with his own continues.
Thank you for coming. Quite obviously, well attended here. A lot of people here are actually interested. A lot of people here are not familiar or never heard of the word Canary Mission. Okay? Can you speak about it, how it's affecting the college kids on campus, and what's the effect that's happening with the anti-Semitism?
So the Canary Mission, I don't work with the Canary Mission. My understanding is the Canary Mission, I've talked with them, I've worked with them in the past in terms of exchanging information. They do investigations into a lot of the campus groups and into a lot of the professors and a lot of the students who are connected with terrorist supporters. And that's been highly effective. They're one of the groups that's been involved in, for example, the plastering of people's faces on posters when they sign an a pro-Hamas piece of letterhead. And that's been really good. I mean, I think that if you're willing to sign a letter in favor of Hamas, then people should know who you are. It's absurd to me that you should be able to. I mean, it's not like you sign it anonymously. You put your name on the thing. If you put your name on the thing, and then people are like, oh, and here's their face. That's not doxing. Doxing is where you give somebody's address or phone number. I've been the victim of it a few times, I know. So it's what Canary Mission is doing is great. I mean, I think that more information is good, more transparency is good. There's a reason that the pro-Hamasniks are hiding their faces at all of these rallies. They don't want to be seen because they know what they're doing is really, really bad and really disliked by the vast majority of the American public.
Thank you.
Hi. So activist Rudy Rothman posted a video recently saying that Israel needs to become self-sufficient. We rely on America for aid, which makes us, reliant on, purchasing weapons from the U.S. What are your thoughts on, Israel becoming self-sufficient and not only to rely on the U.S. for aid?
This is 100% accurate. It's 100% accurate. I've been preaching it for at least 2 decades. First of all, as an American, I prefer that fewer countries rely on USA. As a Zionist, someone who's from Israel, I believe that Israel should not have to go begging at somebody's door every time it wants to defend itself, because sometimes people are going to say no, as has happened not infrequently over the course of the past 10 years. You'll remember in 2014 when there was a delay in the shipment of restocks in the Iron Dome under the Obama administration, which is really egregious. The most important thing I'm going to say tonight is this. There are a lot of rich people in this room. The rich people, it's Harbour. The rich people in this room are giving a lot of charity. That's wonderful. Charity is great. I love giving charity as well. It's a commandment. It's a great thing. If you invest your money, take a large chunk of the money you invest and invest it in business in Israel. It's the most important thing you can do, by far. Forget about the charity. Charity is not a charity. And check what it is. Invest their money, invest their expertise in businesses in the state of Israel. Build up their economy. Israel right now has the 27th largest economy in the world with a population of approximately 7.5 million Jews. That is an economy that could be significantly larger if it were not run by a bunch of morons, unfortunately. I mean, anybody who tries to do business in the state of Israel understands that it is nearly impossible to do business in the state of Israel unless you have a Moroccan in-law or or cousins in the real estate department over there. And I have so many stories about trying to do business in Israel I can't even speak to it. I mean, the red tape is awful, the regulations are awful, they facilitate black market transactions. But that's why they need Americans. They need Americans who actually can bring money and also expertise. Because there's one other problem that's the business established, they're run by Israelis. Meaning that they make great products, they're brilliant, and then you have Israelis selling the products. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen an Israeli sell a product. It's not how we Americans like to hear a product sold. When we Americans hear a product sold, we have a glossy presentation, a PowerPoint. We get wooed, we get told why this is so good for you. The Israeli comes in and like, I don't understand. Why do you buy a product? It's an excellent product. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? I'm American. That's not how we do business over here. The customer is always wrong in Israel. Whereas the customer is always right in the United States. Well, a little bit of that will go a long way. So if you have that expertise in that money, you should use that expertise in that money to build up the state of Israel's economy, which means building up their military, which means building up their realistic strength, so they don't have to go begging and act like the world's land should law, relying on the kindness of strangers that have something bad happens.
So we're going to start winding it down. Seth, I think that you'll be the last question from the public, and we apologize for anybody else, but Ben's time is precious, so take it away, Seth.
You're a good one, Ben. Hi, Ben. Good to see you again. My question tonight is, you shared with us these scary statistics. We've all seen the videos of people marching in New York City, in California, and in all these blue cities and blue states. What does the future look like for the Jewish community in the United States when a Jewish person cannot walk with a kippah in New York City, a city that was built on the backs of Jews?
I mean, it looks like a lot of snowbirds becoming permanent is what it looks like. I mean, we can all see it. I mean, my real estate investment circa 2020 is looking pretty good right now in the state of Florida, and I really overpaid for my house. So, like, the reality is that I think that the population movement is going to continue to accelerate from the Northeast. You're going to see a lot of Jews in New York, in New Jersey, in the tri-state area. They're going to start moving down, and they should. Because as these places become harder for Jews to live, there's no reason why you should bring your kid up in a place where if they walk down the street with people, they have to worry about being clocked in the head from behind by a thug. There's no reason they should have to do that. So you're going to see more and more of that. Florida's wonderful. Florida is
is a conservative state is also an armed state, which means it's a polite state. Like, I don't know how many, I'm saying this at a lot of rallies with a lot of Florida Jews lately. I don't know how many of you guys own guns. Quick show of hands. None owners in Florida. Yeah. And how many of you have gotten guns or gone shooting since October 7th? Yeah, that's right. And those numbers are going to go up. By the way, all the rest of you get a gun and go shooting.
So final question for Ben. Just want to get your opinion. Is Donald Trump our next president?
I can't believe you meant on that. Okay, so here's the thing. Donald Trump is almost certain by the polling data to be the next Republican nominee. I mean, that's just what the polls say. He's way ahead in Iowa right now. He's way ahead in New Hampshire right now. Nikki Haley has an outside shot to maybe beat him in New Hampshire. That would not guarantee her anything going down south because as the field winnows, most of DeSantis is my guy. If the primaries actually make it all the way down to Florida, I'll go for DeSantis in the primary over the other candidates. I love the governor. He's spectacular. On every respect, he's wonderful. On state of Israel, he's unbelievable, better than anyone else. But wishes aren't realities if they're not. So we'll see exactly how the primaries play. If they play out as expected, if they play out according to the current polling data, Trump will be the nominee. And then, who the hell knows? I'm not going to make a prediction on this because I once bet money on the 2016 election. It's the last election I bet money on. I bet the wrong way. The problem, there's some systemic problems for President Trump. The biggest systemic problem is that President Trump is President Trump. And that means that there are a lot of people who really hate him. And if he actually ran Joe Biden's 2020 strategy, he very likely would be the next president of the United States. I mean, if he went to a basement and went to sleep for like the next year, he would wake up and he'd be president of the United States. That is what would happen. If he just put him in the basement, put Shark Week on, little porn, he'll be a happy camper, leave him there for a year, it'll be fine. Turn off the Twitter machine, turn off Truth Social, all will be fine. Like that would be my campaign advice to Donald Trump, because then the focus of the campaign would be Joe Biden, who is truly an awful president and no one likes, and he's got a people rating of 30. The problem is Trump likely to recede into the background? Has Trump ever seen a red light anywhere on earth that he does not jump in front of immediately? And I don't mean like a red light, I mean like a camera light. Like if there's a camera anywhere in a 300-mile radius, he busts through the wall like a Kool-Aid man to be in front of it. And like he will seize spotlight, even when it is not in his interest to do so, because he likes being center of attention. Because again, his entire career was this. I mean, up until he was president, his entire career was, how do I get attention on myself to inflate my real estate values, to get more attention? He's a branding guy. And this is what branding is. Branding is, there's no such thing as bad press. There's just press. But that's not true when you're a candidate. So if I were to put my money on the election right now, I would still think that Biden has some systemic advantages, particularly in the swing states. Because, again, Trump tends to get out the vote on both sides of the aisle, on his own side of the aisle and also on the other side of the aisle. I think a lot of this Pepsi that you're seeing on the Democratic side of the aisle, I think the minute Trump's name is on the ballot, you see a lot of Democratic voters who come home. And it's easy to say that, well, there are a lot of voters in 2020. The reality is, and he won that skin of the seat in 2016. It's not like it was a blowout in 2016 that got reversed in 2020. It was like he won the most anomalous election in American history in 2016, and then he lost in 2020 by a fairly small margin in terms of the votes in the key states, but a fairly large margin in the popular vote. So I would say that right now, I give Biden 55-45 odds of being reelected. I would say 2 months ago, I would give him 70-30 odds. Those odds are closing real fast. But the more Trump stays silent and the more Biden is the center of attention, the better a shot it is that Trump becomes president of the United States. It's certainly not an out-of-the-box possibility that he is reelected at all.
So my only follow-up is that I finished with Donald Trump. I could have finished with Candace Owen, but I'm not going to go there.
I can't comment on that for a variety of reasons. I've spoken about that in this particular area before, and it had consequences, so I'm going to...
Great. All right, ladies and gentlemen, to thank Ben Shapiro, I'd like to call upon the president of the Shul, David Wolf, who has a special gift for Ben for being here this evening.
Good evening. Let's hear another round of applause for Ben and Hill Lawyer as well. Great job. Just 2 minutes again, I want to thank, number one, again, as Elkanan said, I'm David Wolf. I have the privilege and honor to serve as the president of the board of this amazing shul. And I want to thank our incredible committee led by Elhanan who put this beautiful night together. They're an amazing, hard-working committee. Let's give them a round of applause. And again, obviously, thank Ben. As we know, his schedule, I'm sure, is very busy. But most importantly, your words, as always, are inspiration for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. So we thank you for all the work that you continue to do. So we appreciate it. Just a couple of tokens of our appreciation. One, this beautiful Sadat box for the Shul. We give it to all of our new members, so maybe you'll become a new member of the Shul. You come down from both of them once in a while. As well as beautiful commemorative book of the Shul. Again, our first 25 years of history of the Shul. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody for being here. You're welcome to enjoy desserts as well. We have beautiful artwork. All the sales of the artwork, 50% of it goes to the Shul. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, just quickly, all of these words of inspiration can always be very fleeting. Our rabbi always talks about action. So scan the QR code, take on a mitzvah in honor of our soldiers and our people fighting in the state of Israel, and let's take action to do positive mitzvahs on their behalf. Have a great night.